Alright guys, so today I'm going to introduce you to the Pythagorean Theorem model, which is a way that we find various lengths only on a right triangle. So one of the key things I want to talk about is understanding what is what on the right triangle when we're talking about the Pythagorean Theorem. So this right here is going to be called the hypotenuse, and the variable normally associated with that is going to be c. And then we have the legs. And the variables associated with those are A and B. And those are interchangeable right there. So the one that will not be interchangeable is the one for the hypotenuse. So you always have to have the correct one for the hypotenuse. It always has to be C. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, when you see this, there's a formula called Pythagorean Theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And that means leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. All right. Now, the way we do things is, remember, the key thing I want you to remember is the hypotenuse is always the longest side. Really important to remember that. It's always the longest side. Okay? So, the way we do things is, for this, for instance, we count the units. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 units. So we see that that has a length of 4, which means that the area of this is 16, because if I square that, I get 16. All right. The same with this right here. I count 3 units for that leg. So that gives me an area of 9. And I actually see that area is 9 units. And this one right here has a length of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which essentially gives me an area of 25. Now, we all compile this together, okay? And we compile this together, we say 4 squared plus 3 squared equals 5 squared. And when I solve it, that'll be 16 plus 9 equals 25. And I see that those are equal. Now, one of the key things I want you guys to remember with this is, with hypotenuse, the hypotenuse is always opposite of the 90 degree. And you know you get your 90 degree from the part of the L, which makes our leg. So it's always opposite of that. Always. And that's how you distinguish, you know, if it is the hypotenuse or not. So that's one of the key things to remember whenever you're compiling this. Okay? Now, let's take a look at some more notes. And also I want to stress to you guys, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more about when you put this in the calculator. It automatically solves everything for you. Okay? So now, as I told you earlier, in any right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. Okay? So for instance, let me go in here and talk about what are my legs. If I look and see right here, these are my legs right here. And I see that my legs are right there, and my hypotenuse is always opposite of the legs. So that helps me understand what is what. So I'm just going to put some numbers on here. I'm going to use 8, 10, and 6. And remember, I talked about this earlier, that hypotenuse is always the longest side. So let me put everything together. A squared plus 6 squared equals 10 squared. That'll give me 64 plus 36 equals 100. And I see that they are both equal. And I want you guys to remember that equal sign means something. It means that both sides are equal. That's what it means. And once again, we talked about those variables right there. We talked about those variables. So the variable for the legs will be A and B, and the variable for the hypotenuse will be C. So that's A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And that's your formula. So now, this goes to the next portion of our notes for when we're trying to find the hypotenuse. Okay? So sometimes various questions will ask you specifically for the hypotenuse. Okay? So this is the formula that we use whenever we're trying to find the hypotenuse. And that formula is this right here. You do the square root, which is A squared plus B squared. Okay? And most of you guys are using the TI Inspire. So if I put this in here, I do 5 squared plus 12 squared. And I see that my final answer will be 13. So all you have to do is put this directly into the Inspire, just like this. So you take this part right here, so you do square root, and whatever your number is for that leg, you put in there 5 squared plus 12 squared, and it'll automatically solve it for you, and it'll give you an answer of 13. And we look at it and we think, does it make sense? Yes, it does make sense, because 13 represents the longest or the biggest number now. So I know that's going to work right there. Okay? All right. And I can always go back and check it just to make sure it's correct. Now, we come up on a problem like this. And first, you have to know how to graph. Okay, so let me start off my origin. I go 1, 2, 3, and I go up 1. And I do that because that is X and Y. And you know your X goes left and right. And your Y goes up and down. Now, I started my origin for the next one. It's telling me the X is telling me don't go anywhere. Don't go left or right. But my Y is telling me go up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, once again, my X is telling me to stay right there. Don't go anywhere. But my Y is telling me to go up 1. So then all I have to do is connect everything. And what I have to do is, I have to count my units, okay? So I'm trying to find the hypotenuse. So the formula you use again is, for this one, you do A squared plus B squared. You gotta remember that. And that's gonna give me my hypotenuse. Now, one thing I want to stress to you guys is this. Never, ever try to count this right here, because you won't be able to count this. There's no way you can count this. I can't say, you try to guess it, oh, that's 0.50. That right there is 0.05, and this right here is 0.75. It will not work by doing that, okay? So let me just highlight everything I have. That's my hypotenuse, and these are my legs, okay? So as I stated earlier, you can never count these squares right here, but you can count the ones on the legs. So let's count this: 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 4. So that's 4 units right there. And this is 1, 2, 3 units. So now I got my legs. I can put them into this formula: 4 squared plus 3 squared. And when I put that all together and I put in my Inspire, I should come up with an answer of 5. So this right here is a side length of 5. And does it make sense? We know the answer is right, but it does make sense because 5 is now the biggest number, which is the hypotenuse. Let's do another one. This time, we're trying to find the length of a leg in a right triangle, okay? So we're trying to find the leg. Now, here goes my hypotenuse. And here goes the legs. And I'm trying to find that leg right there. So, remember, distinguish. You know this is your hypotenuse because it's opposite of that 90 degree. Okay? So the formula you use to find a leg is this right here. You do the square root of c squared minus b squared. And I stress that to you guys to do it in this way because if you don't, you'll get a negative answer which will not come out correctly for you. So now I put my numbers in here. I do 15 squared minus 9 squared. So whenever you're trying to find the leg, always remember that biggest number is going to come first. The biggest number is going to come first. Let me write that down. When finding leg, the biggest number comes first. All right. So when I put that all in the calculator, I should come up with an answer of 12. And that's how you do it. All right. So now, sometimes they would give you word problems. If they never give you a shape with a word problem and you're trying to find Pythagorean theorem, you always draw it out. Always draw it out. I stress that to you. So, I got John and Dan leave from the same point. So they leave from the same point. But John walks 10 miles north. Walks 10 miles north. Okay? And then we have Dan goes 24 miles east. Okay? And we can determine this by just remembering a compass. North, south, west, and east. So now John is right here and Dan is right here. So now I got to figure out how far apart are they. So think about this. What is that distance right here going to represent? That's going to be the hypotenuse right there. And how do we find the hypotenuse again? We'd use this formula right here. A squared plus b squared. And we already put it under the square root sign. So when I put it under the square root sign, I'm going to do 24 squared plus 10 squared. Okay? And when I put that all into the calculator, it gives me a hypotenuse of 26. And think about it, does that make sense? Yes, it makes sense because 26 is the biggest number and that is the longest side. All right. So, think and discuss. You guys tell me which side of a right triangle is always the longest side. Is it the leg or the hypotenuse? If you said the hypotenuse, you are correct. Okay? And if you have a problem like this where they give you the three numbers, all you have to do is just use the formula a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Put in your numbers. Alright. And I solve it, put it all in the calculator. So I get 4 plus 9 equals 16. And then when I solve this right here, I get Are those equal right there? No, so that's not a right triangle. Those would not be the lengths of a right triangle. Okay? And I can also see that, hey, that 4 is my biggest number. That's why I know to put it right there for C. All right? And this is it for this. One other thing I want to keep you in mind is that, remember, the hypotenuse is always opposite of the 90-degree angle. And another thing I want you to remember is that if you have a word problem and you're trying to do Pythagorean theorem, you always draw everything out. Always. Don't try to guess, draw it out. Experience always tells me to draw things out because then I can see it visually and I can attach numbers to it. All right, thank you guys.